For 18 years, the world believed J.C. Dugard had simply vanished, but the truth was far more disturbing. On June 10th, 1991, 11-year-old J.C. was walking toward her school bus in California when a car suddenly stopped near her. A woman grabbed her, pulled her inside, and the vehicle sped away. Her family was left with only questions. Where was she? Was she still alive? For years, investigators searched, but there was no answer. Then, 18 years later, something completely unexpected happened. J.C. was still alive, and the people who had taken her had been hiding an unimaginable secret all that time. For J.C.'s family, the first days became weeks, and the weeks became years. Her mother refused to believe that her daughter was gone forever, while investigators continued searching for clues. But J.C. was being kept hidden by Philip Garrido and his wife, Nancy. She was taken to a property in Antioch, California, where she remained for years. During that time, J.C. was isolated from the outside world and was given a completely different life. The outside world kept searching for the missing 11-year-old girl, but J.C. was growing older in a place almost nobody knew existed. Then something happened that would eventually break the silence. In 2009, Garrido visited the University of California, Berkeley campus with J.C. and her daughters. That unusual encounter attracted attention and questions began to surface. Investigators had no idea that they were suddenly standing only steps away from a missing girl they had been searching for nearly 2 decades. For 18 years, J.C.'s family had no idea that she was living only hours away from the place where she had disappeared. Then, in August 2009, a strange encounter at the University of California, Berkeley changed everything. Philip Garrido arrived with 2 young girls and a woman he called Alyssa. A university employee became suspicious and asked him to return. When police began checking his background, they discovered something alarming. Garrido was a convicted kidnapper and rapist who was on parole. The woman with him did not look like a stranger to the girls. She looked like their mother. Investigators began asking questions and the story started falling apart. At first, the woman continued using the identity Garrido had given her, but during questioning, the truth slowly emerged. She finally told police her real name, J.C. Dugard. The missing 11-year-old from 1991 had been standing in front of them all along. Investigators then searched Garrido's property in Antioch. Behind the house, they discovered a hidden area filled with sheds, tents, and makeshift structures concealed from the outside world. It was a secret compound where J.C. had spent years with her 2 daughters. The discovery was shocking enough, but investigators soon realized something even more disturbing. J.C. had been there for nearly 18 years while her family and authorities continued searching for her. And the most haunting question was still waiting. How many chances had the outside world already had to find her? When investigators realized that the woman standing before them was J.C. Dugard, the case suddenly changed from a decades-old missing person mystery into a rescue. J.C. was alive, and so were the 2 daughters she had raised while hidden from the outside world. Authorities moved quickly to protect them and began examining the property where J.C. had been kept for years. The discovery of the hidden structures made one thing painfully clear. This was not a brief disappearance. J.C. had spent nearly 18 years separated from the life she had once known. But there was another extraordinary part of the story. J.C. had managed to survive and raise her daughters under circumstances that outsiders could barely imagine. After her rescue, investigators and the public slowly learned that the woman missing since 1991 had built an entire life inside captivity. Her family, meanwhile, had continued hoping that she was alive. In the days after her recovery, J.C. was finally reunited with her mother, Terry Probin. After 18 years of searching and uncertainty, mother and daughter were standing together again. It was a moment that seemed almost impossible when JC had first disappeared at 11, but the reunion was only the beginning. JC now had to face something just as difficult as being found, rebuilding a life she had lost almost 2 decades earlier. She had disappeared as a child and returned as a 29-year-old woman with daughters of her own, and there was one question everyone wanted answered: what had happened during those 18 missing years? JC eventually chose to tell her story herself. In her memoir, A Stolen Life, and in later interviews, she described the experience from her own perspective. She became an advocate for other survivors and began speaking publicly about recovery, resilience, and rebuilding after captivity. The story that had once been known only as a missing child case was now being told by the person who had lived through it, and the most remarkable part was still ahead. JC was no longer simply the girl who had disappeared. She had become the woman who survived. After 18 years, JC Dugard was finally free, but freedom did not mean that everything suddenly became easy. She had disappeared at 11 years old and returned at 29, with an entire childhood and adolescence stolen from her. On August 26, 2009, she finally wrote her own name again, JC Lee Dugard. In her own memoir, she described that moment as taking her name back. She was reunited with her mother and began the difficult process of rebuilding a life outside captivity. She also had to help her daughters adjust to a world they had never known. Her story was no longer only about what had been taken from her. It became a story about what she could still build. JC eventually decided to tell the story herself. In A Stolen Life, she described her kidnapping, captivity, rescue, and recovery in her own words. The book became a major bestseller and allowed the public to hear the story directly from the survivor, rather than through investigators or news reports. But JC did not want her identity to remain forever connected only to the word victim. She began speaking about survival, healing, and the possibility of building a future after unimaginable trauma. Her second memoir, Freedom, My Book of Firsts, focused on the experiences that came after her rescue and the challenges of learning to live independently. And perhaps that is the most powerful ending to this story. For 18 years, someone else controlled what JC could say, where she could go, and even what name she could use. Then, in 2009, she took that name back. The world had spent 18 years asking one question: where is JC Dugard? But after she was found, a different question became more important. What can JC become now that she is free? Her answer was simple. She would live. She would tell her story, and she would make sure that the 18 years taken from her would not define every year that came after. J.C. Dugard disappeared as an 11-year-old girl. She returned 18 years later as a survivor, and this time nobody could take her name away again.